In this video, we're going to change the subject to the formula where the subject, in this case x, is within a fraction and it's being squared as well. So remember the steps we had before. We want to isolate the subject, any x terms, on one side of the equation. But actually, we've got a step before that. We also want to let the x escape anything it's trapped inside of. So if it's in any brackets or in a root or it's within a fraction, we want to free everything up first. So we need to get rid of that fraction. So how do we get rid of this fraction? Well, we just multiply through by the denominator of that fraction. So we're going to multiply both sides of the equation by this 2x squared minus a. So let's do that. And multiply both sides by 2x squared minus a. Now the left-hand side, we've got y multiplied by 2x squared minus a. And the right-hand side, the times by 2x squared minus a, is going to cancel out this over 2x squared minus a, and you're just left with the x squared plus a at the top like that. Okay, that's good. So we've dealt with the fraction. Now we've got these brackets on the left-hand side we want to deal with. So we expand it out. We do y times 2x squared, which is 2x squared y. Remember alphabetical order with the number first, the 2 first. And then y times minus a, which is minus ay. And now there's no brackets, no fractions, great. So we can now apply these steps on the right. So step 1 was to isolate the subject on one side of the equation. Now the subject is x. So we want to get all the x terms on one side of the equation. So I could get them on the left or the right, but I'm going to put them on the left. The reason I want the x squared terms on the left is because if they were on the right instead, so I subtracted 2x squared y to move it over to here, I would then have to get the non-x terms on the left. Now this plus a is not an x term, so I'd have to subtract it to move it here. And then you have minus ay minus a. And we just want to avoid too many negative terms. We certainly don't like to start expression with a minus. So it'd make more sense to put the x terms on the left. So I'm going to subtract x squared to move it over to this side of the equation. So you change the sign, get minus x squared. And then I'm going to move this minus ay term, because it's not an x term, to the other side of the equation by adding ay to both sides. So I get a plus ay. And now the x terms are on the left and the non-x terms on the right. Great. So we've done step 1. We've isolated the subject on one side of the equation. So step 2 is to factorize out the subject. Now notice, although we could factorize out x here, we can actually factorize out x squared. These terms have a common factor of x squared, so always factorize out the highest power of the subject. Now x squared times what is 2x squared y, which is 2y, and x squared times what is minus x squared, which is minus 1. And then step 3 is to divide appropriately. Now this x squared has been multiplied by all of 2y minus 1. So to get rid of the times by 2y minus 1, we divide both sides by 2y minus 1. So on the left-hand side, we then just have x squared. And if we divide by 2y minus 1 on the right, you get a plus ay over 2y minus 1. Now we're nearly done. This is looking much better because the x is almost on its own and it is on one side of the equation. But we've got this squared here. We need it in the form x equals something to be the subject of the formula. So we square root both sides to get rid of that squared. And we get x is equal to the square root of all of a plus ay over 2y minus 1. Now, technically speaking, we should have a plus or minus in front of this. And the reason is this. If I had, for example, x squared equals 9, and I asked you to solve that, well, there's two solutions because, well, what squared is 9? Well, 3 squared is obviously 9. So 3 is the solution to that equation. But minus 3 squared is also 9. Minus 3 multiplied by itself is 9. So the solution can also be minus 3. And we write that as x equals plus or minus 3. So basically, when you square root both sides, you need to have plus or minus on one side of the equation, which is what I've done here. So we've managed to make x the subject to the formula. It's on its own on one side of the equation, and we are done.